right, good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Charisse Gibson, and as promised, we continue the conversation on race in our country and how we can work together to help dismantle systemic racism and recognize biases that, as you just saw in our report, can become extremely dangerous. Now, during this virtual town hall, you will hear from several people who not only play a role in local leadership and activism, but those who have been vocal in the fight against racial injustice and inequalities we have seen in America. Introducing our panelists virtually, I wish you were all here with us right now. New Orleans Police Superintendent Shaun Ferguson, award-winning actor, activist, and co-owner of WWL-TV Radio, Wendell Pierce, President of Loyola University, Tania Tetlow, attorney and special counsel for criminal justice to the Louisiana Supreme Court, Kenn Barnes. You just saw Kenn interviewed in our program, The Talk, and Tyler Ammerman, the organizer of In My Hometown, St. Tammany. Thank you all so much for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
All right, Kenn, I'm just going to go ahead and begin with you. You were part of this conversation and had the opportunity to watch along with our viewers and our panelists. Can you share your thoughts on those who participated and the outcome of the talk, or what you hope the outcome might be?
Well, first of all, Charisse, thank you so much for having me here today. I think the conversation was a great one. You had at least 4 different sets of people, all with so many different perspectives and issues that they had, but although unique, all shared a collective memory of what it is to be African American in America, in Louisiana, and how do we deal with that, the conversations that come around it. I thought it was such a great conversation to have, because it's a conversation that may be inside of our community, but others don't know about it. And by sharing that, it helps others know the different stripes that we deal with as a community, so that we can better together, come together and build for a better tomorrow.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for participating in it, Kenn. And Superintendent Ferguson, I don't know if you had an opportunity to watch this part, but it became a rather emotional topic, not just on camera, but all for a lot of people, and not only for one of the mothers that was involved in our piece, but for the men involved as well. The conversation when it came to interactions with police officers. Now, something that stood out to me was Jeff Daniels, who said that it almost felt as though if it was ingrained in you that you will have a negative experience with police. Now, as not only an officer, but as a Black man, would you say that that was something that was ingrained in you? And if so, now that you're at the helm of your department, how do you believe that the department can reestablish trust within the Black community?
Well, let me start by saying thank you as well for allowing me this opportunity to share this conversation with everyone. Being a Black man raised in New Orleans, I can agree that it is somewhat ingrained. As a young Black kid in the streets of New Orleans, we had a certain fear, a heavy certain fear still, of police officers. We saw police officers who would want to go in an opposite direction. That has been one of the biggest challenges that we as a department have to overcome. But that is something that I have been committed to, because I am from the city of New Orleans, and I know how I felt as a kid. But I also know we have many great men and women on the New Orleans Police Department who do various things for the community, like mentorship, coaching, things of that nature. They're just as much a part of the community as we are. And your show just now just gave some light, gave a testament of many, and educated many who just have not had any thoughts of what was going on. I think that's what we've learned over the last month. Knowledge is power, and we need to educate one another as to what others are feeling or have been seeing throughout the course of their lifespan that many people just did not know was going on with them.
I know when we talk about that education, you know, that a lot of people have, and that understanding of different biases that a lot of people have, I know that we want to see some more better community relations with the police department. I know actively that you all are working on dealing with implicit and explicit bias. How is that planning to work out?
So we had that training some years ago, specifically for the entire department. Right now, we're doing that specific training with our recruits in every class, as well as every officer has to attend a 40-hour in-service, or more or less a recertification training every year. And within that, there's still 5 to 6 hours of those 40 hours of in-service training, specifically about implicit and explicit bias training. And we're going to be doing some of that tomorrow, actually, with our our command staff, our training staff, as well as our professional standards and accountability bureau, just to see and vet some programs that are out there to make sure that we can bring something that is quantified to us, again, to build on that foundation that we have. Because we've had a great relationship with our community, but we must build upon that.
Well, I mean, Tania, you focused on racism within the criminal justice community prior to your time in Loyola, and in listening to Superintendent Ferguson's comments, can you tell us a little bit more about where this mistrust is rooted when it comes to police protecting communities of color? And I pose that same question to Wendell as well.
Well, it's rooted in about 400 years of history and of constant sort of use of the police as complicit in racial violence, both in imposing it, but also in failing to protect from it. And we see both things now. We see the police killings, and we see the killings that happen from private racial violence that went unpunished, of Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon Martin, of where police have failed to protect against racial violence. And so this has been decade after decade after decade of attacks we've imposed on Black people in this country. And we've gotten better, but that progress isn't inevitable. It's fought for tooth and nail day after day after day. It's the kind of hard work Chief Ferguson is doing, is the kind of grueling effort that NOPD has made under the consent decree with the Justice Department Civil Rights section to really change fundamentally the culture of a police department. And it takes a long time to earn people's trust back. And you don't do it by just claiming you have a right to it. You have to earn it.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. I agree with you completely. What happens is we have a history of this. As the president said, it goes all the way back. For years, we're talking about Thibodeau massacre, where 50 African Americans are killed in 1887 because the Black community did not support striking white sugarcane farmers, and they went through the community killing them without any sort of accountability. We're talking about Liberty Place, when you saw Reconstruction, bring Black police officers being attacked by a white supremacist militia that could not stand and see Black folks actually in the uniform. To see, it upset them so much to see someone like Chief Ferguson in a police uniform during Reconstruction. But we don't have to even go back that far. We know that over the course of time, a culture of abuse has been nurtured in some departments by certain police officers. And we always hope that the good police officers and the good leadership like Chief Ferguson are the ones that root it out. Police have to understand that everyone has to get out of this place of denial. You know, we know that police officers carry what is called a sandwich bag. If it's a bad shoot, you plant a gun on them. We know that police officers always have said, you know, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. So shoot first. Those sort of attitudes we have to root out. That's implicit and explicit. And we know that the thing that will do that is those policies that give comfort to that. Qualified immunity has to be changed. I welcome the mass retirements across this country of police officers who feel as though the reform that is coming is just too much, that's tying their hands. That's good. That means you should not be in this police force, because a good police officer will be able to handle these reforms and still be a good police. Understand that I do not have to go into a community as if I am a member of a gang that's protected by the badge and the law. And that's the way policing has happened in Black communities. I also need to ask allies to stop feigning ignorance. You know, what disturbs me in these conversations in the last couple of weeks is, really? I didn't know that happened in your community. Really? Black folks just get rolled up by the police and thrown against the wall, and it was the first time they saw it? No, Black Lives Matter has been going on for 4 years. We saw what happened. We all intrinsically know what happened with Trayvon Martin. Yeah. We know what happened and saw what happened to Walter Scott. We know that this is happening, and when people feign this ignorance of let's have this conversation, I say, you know, my days are numbered. I have more days behind me than in front of me. So for your own personal involvement, that's fine. In the meantime, we have to change institutional racism and institutional police abuse and abuses that lend itself to that. We should have police living in our communities.
Yes.
St. Tammany, oh no, resident clause, it's a hot button issue here in New Orleans. But I tell you what, why don't we take CBDG money and give 1%, 2% mortgages to police officers the day they get out of the academy, and then tie it to a blighted house in Central City. And you see that we are going to incentivize people from the community to become members of the police force. And that's the ultimate in community policing. Those are solutions that we can put on the table that we know about. We don't have to dance around, do the dance of denial that we didn't know this was happening to Black folks since 1619.
Well, I mean, before I get to Kenn for this next question, Chief Ferguson, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to those comments.
Yeah, I agree. We have to be a part of the community in order to understand the community in which we are serving. I think what we've seen with regards to the residency rule with the New Orleans Police Department, the city has changed, the dynamics have changed since Katrina. And quite honestly, just being able to afford to live in the city of New Orleans has been tough. So we welcome some sort of housing assistance for the officers, because I would love to have our officers right in the middle of our community, thereby better understanding the community in which they're serving, especially those that we have hired from out of state.
I agree with you, Chief. I think just for consideration, all those in administration, consider a 1 or 2% mortgage for police officers coming out of the academy and tie it to blighted properties in New Orleans. And there you kill 2 problems with 1 stone.
You definitely do here. A quick question. Kenn mentioned something during the story that didn't necessarily make the story, but he talked about the differential treatment that Black victims of crime got versus anyone else. Some people, we mentioned it a little bit earlier with Ahmaud Arbery's case and how nothing was done until the video came out, maybe about weeks later. But can you talk to me, Kenn, a little bit? You mentioned something about respectability politics. When the protests started to happen and when we started to see the protests grow more and more and see buildings get destroyed and homes get destroyed, there was the big call of, well, what will MLK do? And we had a brief conversation about that. Can you just express to me a little bit more about that and the treatment of Black victims of crime?
Yes, certainly. So very often when we see crime that's propagated against Black people by officers, and there's a march against that type of violence when the officer is seen acting wrong, oftentimes individuals in the public will say, well, what was the person doing? What were they wearing? Well, they had criminal history from a decade ago, or they had their pants sagging, they had locks, they had a hood, or what about Black on Black crime, or what about this building that was burnt down? All these are distractions from what's actually happening. Whenever we're dealing with a unarmed Black person being killed by an officer, in those instances, to bring up Black on Black crime, or if there's another situation where crime is happening, we bring up Black on Black crime, that is a fallacy on 2 points. First, crime that happens Black on Black is always going to be intra-community. Crime normally happens like that because we are so racially segregated in America that most oftentimes crime that occurs in our own neighborhoods. The people in our neighborhoods are normally our same race because we have been so segregated due to redlining, to covenants, other racial practices, which have led us to just be landlocked into these communities of just one race. 2, to bring up Black on Black crime or to bring up a building burning when we're discussing an individual that's been killed, it just flies in the face of the situation and comes off as if insensitive and not paying attention to what's occurring. And that's because when individuals are saying, hey, we want to stop being killed, anything but I hear you and this is what we can do to help you, it sounds like a but. And when you have a but in a conversation very serious about people being killed, then it comes as if you don't care about what that person is saying. So it kind of flies in the face. Now, to go back to respectability politics, a lot of individuals say, well, what would Martin Luther King do? Well, we saw that Martin Luther King marched down Selma in a all-Black suit with his fellow marchers, and he was met with dogs. He was met with hoses on so many different blocks while in a full suit. So respectability has never stopped an oppressor or someone wanting to harm someone from harming, but now it's used as a sword or a shield to block away from the actual hard work of saying, hey, we need to stand up, we need to come together, and we need to find a way to address these issues of systemic racism, classism, and all other isms. One last thing I'd like to touch on is that very often when we talk about these marches of Black Lives Matter, they bring up, well, what about the marches against Black on Black crime or other forms of crime? Well, we see that we have organizations such as the organization in my neighborhood, the Central City Youth Against Violence, or the Treme Youth. They have a march against violence. Or you have Breakout, which is an organization that just had a rally against violence against trans and LGBTQ youth in New Orleans. So these things are going on. Now, just because they don't get the same type of news footage as Black Lives Matter or other protests, or the same type of hate and comment sections of news groups, does not mean that these types of protests and this public outrage does not exist.
Oh, Tania, I want to pose that same question to you.
About Black victims?
Yes.
There is a lot of research that shows what matters even more than how differential the treatment is of Black defendants is the race of the victim. That we are 6 times as likely to give the death penalty if the person murders a white person versus a Black person, that the conviction rates in rape cases vary highly according to the race of the victim. And so we have 2 problems. We have over enforcement of the law, of unequal sort of, pulling over drivers because they're Black, of all the ways we do that. We also have the problem of under enforcement, of not providing police protection in poor and minority communities, of not caring about Black victims in the same way, of not, at the extremes historically, not doing anything about lynchings and the murder of civil rights leaders. And so we have to worry about both, which means the answer is not just to get rid of police, it's to have good police. It's to find ways to reform the system, to reimagine it, to think about how we can make it better, because we need a world where we both protect Black people and we don't falsely accuse them, because they have to deal with both. So that true equal protection matters. And that's something that was part of the consent decree in New Orleans and all sorts of cities, is the Justice Department has started looking in that as well, of how to be fair to victims.
Well, something we touched on here during our story was talking about a prejudice and even believing Black people and some of the things that they've gone through or continue to go through, and that comes from our own Kenn Barnes. And also just going back to something Wendell just mentioned about allyship, I feel like this year we've had so many people discuss how is it that I can be a better ally? And Tyler, I want to bring you in for this one. You have a very interesting story kind of regarding your experience growing up in Mandeville and how that experience was so different from your Black counterparts. Let's first go back to a post that you made several years ago proclaiming that all lives matter. Can you discuss how that post and George Floyd's murder kind of led you to where you are now, and now leading a conversation in your own community about race in this country?
Sure. It's kind of an embarrassing story about growth. So at the end of the day, I guess it can't be all that embarrassing. So I'm happy to speak on that. A number of years ago, I posted an All Lives Matter paragraph, and it was well articulated and well thought out from a position of a good-hearted individual speaking from a place of love and God. And I guess my basis of my post and my argument was I felt a bit cast aside, like, well, everybody life matters. And if everybody lived by the golden rule and treated others as you wanted to be treated, we should have a perfect society. And it went out into the interwebs, and my friends and colleagues from all over and all year, throughout my life, came forward and explained why that was hurtful and why I was actually illegitimizing or casting aside the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was eye-opening. It hurt to know that I hurt them. And I think for me, that was kind of my wake-up call and education into what exactly Black Lives Matter means. And it's specifically, as was so eloquently put in your segment just now, is very touching. It's about the unfair treatment of Black people and their unfair deaths in the hands of people that we pay to protect us and our communities. And I guess with the recent events in George Floyd, I felt a overwhelming need to try and bring my community together. So I organized it was going to be a silent knee at the Mandeville Lakefront gazebo, which is basically the pillar of the Mandeville community. You see the lakefront emblem on everything that they do. And knowing the demographic in Mandeville, I knew that as a Mandeville resident, I needed to speak up. It's 93% plus white. And I organized something at Lakefront so that we could show physically an act of solidarity for the Black brothers and sisters in our community, that we're listening, we're here, we're ready to act. And just as was mentioned on this panel, how can we be an ally? So from that, a group of us decided we got to keep things going. This organically grew into a formal discussion panel. It's called In My Hometown, A Conversation About Race. And we actually have another one set up. It's going to be the third in the series on the 30th of this month. Huge shout out to Michael Kelly, who's kind of helping produce this out in Sacramento. He's a former classmate of mine. So we've had people that haven't talked to each other in 15 years come together, some of us. And it's grown organically. And it's hearing people in St. Tammany Parish still saying all lives matter that makes me stand up and start to say more about it, try and educate and form this panel. And that's what we're going to try and do.
I mean, when you talk about that, and of course, I want you all to chime in on this one. We're talking about allyship here, and I know that we've had people who have made this attempt to be a better ally, to better understand. But Wendell, you said that this is something that people should already understand.
Yeah, I guess that's just the cynic in me. I'd look at Tyler and go, oh, you see, we just saw a great example of the best of humanity, right? Someone who, through educating themselves and listening to others who have importance to them, open their eyes, where he can have an epiphany about how all lives matter, would be an affront to someone, and realize that Black Lives Matter was saying that because of the affronts that were happening in our community. So I defer to the best in his humanity that was just on display, as a rebuttal to the cynicism you heard earlier from me.
Okay.
And that's just cynicism. There are people that are going to feign, and I'm sure Tyler can tell you that there are people who can feign they were not aware of certain injustices happening in the community, even though they were benefiting from them. Or there are people in our community here that aren't aware that the disparity in wealth and the huge portions of the poverty that's in our communities don't benefit a certain few. And it's not political. It's something that we've known for a long time. When you ride down St. Charles Avenue, it's not by chance that just 2 blocks behind it is Central City, an underserved community that goes through 300 years of generation of the descendants of those who were enslaved and built the wealth that we see on St. Charles Avenue going way back, probably built the houses too. We know that they built the houses. So to understand that and how we have shared surnames and all, and just pretend like we do on our plantation tours, that this was just a wonderful house built in 1862. And in 1925, when the Smith family built it, this ornate arcade was painted, and we're going, you missed something about this sacred ground here and what happened. And I think that if we get away from this idea of this denial, and actually have courage. Courage is acting in the face of fear, not in the absence of it. And so many people say, well, I don't want to have that conversation because they don't want to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if they have the conversations, they will get to a better place. It celebrates the best part of your humanity. As a student of human behavior, as an actor, I understand we're the closest thing to a psychologist, that it's the thing that's going to embolden you and actually give you growth and actually give you so much more comfort in who you are and who your humanity is. And that's the personal growth that you have to have when you look at the racial reckoning that we have now. But let's put that aside. The middle-aged man that I am, I want to deal with the structural, institutionalized racism, right? And the reforms that we want in policing. I speak to you from Pontchartrain Park right now, which just became on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yes.
Right? Because this Moses generation that my father was a part of, who came back from World War II, could not even buy a home in New Orleans. Sanctioned segregation by our federal government. You could not get a FHA loan if you were Black. Now, we fought that, and now we've changed it. But at the same time, we're still dealing with that happening in the banking system, predatory lending, redlining still going on, and we have to hold them accountable. We have to be vigilant about this. People always ask, well, Wendell, where's the hope? You know, when are we going to come to the end of this? We shouldn't have that discussion yet. This is a cancer that was at times in remission. Now is full on metastasizing in all of our organs. And if we don't take the time to attack it, we don't have the time to sit back and realize or wonder, when are we going to have that hopeful kumbaya moment? Right now, this cancer is killing all of us. So those who hold on to the cancer are the ones who are going to only damage themselves. Like hate, it's like holding on to the blade of a knife. The longer you hold on to it, the stronger you hold on to it, you only burn yourself, you only cut yourself, you bleed. And until we as a society understand to get rid of these structural, racial disparities and injustices that we know were placed there by design, and it has nothing to do with political party. Redlining came from FDR. Literally the term was, if your community is rural or has one Negro, put a red line on the map and you do not get any federal dollars. That's redlining. That was a part of the New Deal. So it was a part of our policies. And until we start to get rid of that and understand that we put policies in that disparage communities and promote this idea of injustice, we're going to suffer from it. When it comes to policing, and I'll be brief, when it comes to policing, the 13th Amendment said, all of these American citizens have every right there is. They are not enslaved unless they have a criminal charge. And those who wanted to keep people enslaved said, oh, we have our loophole. So now, instead of you being a bounty hunter, all you have to do is join a police force, criminalize them, and then it becomes mass incarceration. So this sort of cancer went from enslavement to Jim Crow to mass incarceration, which is the prison industrial complex, because we make money from cheap labor here in Louisiana. In any parish, you can call and a trustee, and Mr. Barnes could tell me I'm right or wrong, and Chief could tell me I'm right or wrong. You can call someone to come and cut your lawn and pay them just $1.50 or whatever. That is something that we should be abhorrent to us as a society. We should not have trustees serving Mardi Gras balls. We should not have trustees serving government balls, governor's balls. Get out of that practice of mass incarceration as a means of cheap labor. That is a sickness in our society.
Well, I want to give any of you an opportunity to respond to Wendell's comments.
I just want to.
Oh,
go ahead,
please go, Dean.
I just want to reiterate that that denial is so rooted in self-interest and selfishness, and that when you're getting the privilege, when you get paid more, when you have more access to wealth, to security, to all of those things, it's in your interest to not know where that came from and to not pay attention to that. And so it's time for those excuses to end. And it needs to end not by calling your Black friend and ask them to explain their entire life experience to you. It needs to end by reading and learning and knowing your history and reading literature and watching film and having human empathy and learning, because right now this sort of fog has lifted and we see more clearly, but it could come back very quickly if we don't pay attention and we don't make a seismic shift in our perception of the truth.
Kenn, go ahead.
Yes. I mean, I don't know why you got me going after these two. There's not much left to say in this world. But kind of like the metastasized cancer going through a body, you have to dig and look deeper to where these forms of hatred are going. So just as Tania has said, that you must read and learn yourself and not just rely on your Black friend to give you the whole biography of their life. You have to start to dig. If you've dug a hole to put your head in it to hide from the facts of what's going on around you, you must dig deeper whenever you start to figure out, hey, I need to relearn to figure out what's happening. So what Mr. Pierce spoke about was with the fact that his father came over, wasn't able to get a loan due to redlining by the FHA. Well, by not getting a home, then that led to a fact that there was a loss in the opportunity to gain wealth. And many individuals of African descent, African Americans, Black people in America, were not able to build that family wealth that many others could. And they had to live in certain areas where they could afford, since they couldn't get an FHA loan, which pushed a lot of them into inner cities, which made a very racial homogenous group. So, and for the individuals who are not part of that race that were there, a lot of them moved out to make sure that they can keep the value, the little value they had left in the property, because once Black people started to move into it, their property value went down. So then we got that area to be even more racial homogenous. So by that, then we have just Black people who are most likely not being paid as much as they should be. And we have that from scientific fact. And due to the fact that we fund our educational system based on property tax, that means that those Black people and their kids there won't be able to get the education to grow up and do better. Now, we sometimes speak of old adages and ideas that, well, we know that if someone, some student did not perform as well on a LEAP test or some test, then it's most likely that they will, fail, drop out, or commit a crime in the future without looking to the reason why that student may have not done well. You put the student in an area that is low income, does not have a great family structure because it's over policed, and it's most likely that their father or their mother may have some over interaction with the police unnecessarily, and then they're not getting an education. So then when they fail and then they end up in some type of predicament, you say, well, look, the prophecy fulfills itself without realizing that we've set up that system for it to do that. So in order to do that, to be an ally, what you have to do is first make the situation, recognize the situation without making that situation about you. Realize that there is a problem. Then, if you have someone that you can speak to, feel free to speak to them, but it's not their duty to break down their whole life experience to you. But before you do that, it's probably best if you just look on Amazon bestsellers, White Fragility. There's a lot of books on colorism and race that you can read, educate yourself. There's a lot of discussions by NPR on YouTube you can listen to, and you can self-educate, then have those conversations and be someone similar to Mr. Tyler to lead movements where you can. But also, you don't have to be the leader. You can very much just be a participant there. And as a participant or a leader, what you can do is use your privilege. Very often we see instances where African Americans who are protesting on different streets that were protested weeks previously by individuals of a different race carrying guns are treated wildly more different than the counterparts that preceded them. And what you can do as an ally is to be there to stop the police if you see a police officer doing something that is illegal and wrong, or to document it, to be to intervene, or to just be there to give comfort to the people you're trying to be an ally there for.
Well, definitely a lot for you all to say, especially in regards to allyship, redlining, something my own grandfather experienced, and of course, and lifting that fog on what's happening in their country. Chief Ferguson, now that that fog has been lifted, as Tania mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of people in these protests are calling for police reform or an actually defunding of the police department. Can you tell us your thoughts on that, and how does the police department plan to get through these next couple of months, next couple of years in being allies with the communities that they serve?
And that is the key, continuing to be an ally with the community. That word defunding, I think it was just a poor choice of words to use for what it is really about, which is reallocating funding to help the community, the overall city, non-violent or non-criminal calls that we are responding to, such as mental health, such as homelessness and things of those nature, welfare checks, should the New Orleans Police Department really be responding, or any law enforcement agency really respond to those types of calls. So we're having those conversations now internally and trying to develop or design a format in which we can move forward with that, to have less police involvement in those type of activities and really address the root cause, which is the violence that we're seeing in our city streets. But we have to continue to stay the course. We as a department, we have the foundation built here, the 8 demands for reform: no chokehold, strangleholds, use of force reporting, intervention, EPIC. We have ethical policing is courageous. This is something that this is going to be our 3rd year. Next month, we're going to be on our 3rd year of hosting ethical policing is courageous. And in doing so, we have an opportunity to share with many departments across the country what we have done. And that means holding an officer responsible and accountable, mandating that they intervene if they see there's some sort of misconduct by anyone. Ourselves at the highest level of accountability in itself, as well as our community holding us accountable. I think we've done a great job with that. But again, now we have to build upon that foundation and move forward. And we partnered up with Loyola University and hosting this once again. It will be virtually, and it will be free this time, because we think it is that important to share with everyone how we should hold one another accountable in the law enforcement profession and intervening and being a better ally to everyone.
Well, Tania, speaking of Loyola University, some current and former Black students at Loyola have expressed their concerns of being targets of implicit bias or microaggressions. You've publicly stated that the university plans to analyze those injustices in order to help dismantle them. Now, Loyola has a solid foundation we've talked about in the city of New Orleans. How is the university leading the way and being part of the solution and creating a more inclusive environment and helping others to address their biases as well?
Well, it's a humbling reminder for me that, we have this incredible community that we bring together from around the country that is half students of color, a third first in their family to go to college. That diversity alone does not guarantee equity and inclusion. And that we are such a warm place that we forget that we don't live in a bubble and we're not immune from the racism that this country is steeped in. And so how do we root that out? As Chief knows, you don't just snap your fingers and command everybody to stop thinking that way. So how do you train and educate, which luckily is the business that we're in? And I tell faculty, if you think you don't have something new to learn, you're in the wrong industry. Of how we understand ourselves, our obligations to students, and help them understand their obligations to each other. Because the point of what we're doing for them is to create opportunity. It's to build their confidence. It's to launch them into everything that their talent can allow them to do in the world. It's not to cut them down and to make them feel less than. And so in the ways both subtle and worse that happens on any campus, it takes an awful lot of constant work and effort to root that out. So we've been busy doing that and redoubling our efforts, because these last few months, I think, for so many leaders, for me, has been a very humbling reminder of listening to stories of people's pain and what they've gone through, and of trying not to get defensive, of hearing and understanding that we need to do better.
And Tyler, that is something that you've discussed with me, the fact that you had friends who went to school with you, went through the same experiences as you, or had the same lifestyle as you, but went through totally different experiences. Did you find it difficult to believe them about their pain? And do you feel like in talking to the people in your community, they're having a hard time in believing Black people about what it is that they experience and feel?
No, it didn't take much for me to believe them at all. It took them speaking up. I think Wendell brought it up. It's easy for people to turn an eye to some certain things that you may perceive. This might not be exactly right. That doesn't really sit well. But as an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, how do you speak up? How do you go against the grain? So I think in a minuscule way, I might have already known, and not to say that I perpetuated any any wrongdoing or anything, but just given that I grew up in St. Tammany Parish, I saw groups of middle schoolers, casting around jokes, totally disenfranchising a whole community, a whole race. And that's another embarrassing detail about my life. So I think there's things that we need to do in the education system to help promote safe places to have these talks, to educate the educators on how to handle self-portrait art projects in which they have to choose a color for their skin. And this is an actual story somebody wrote in to us on, is a white presenting biracial little boy with Hispanic descent was made to go grab the dark brown construction paper, came home crying, hating his skin, didn't want to go back to school. And how much education for that for that teacher could have prevented that, to be a little bit more racially sensitive in all aspects. And with my group in my hometown, A Conversation About Race, specifically speaking on St. Tammany Parish, we are promoting resources. Everybody on this panel talked about what type of educational tools, what books we can read, what documentaries we can watch to help further educate our own selves before having these tough conversations with our own inner circles. Because we're not going to change the world in one day, but we can change it with one heart at a time. Mm-hmm. And it's the small, simple conversations in our own homes that propagate throughout the community. So I thought that was huge. I know that wasn't exactly your question. I just thought that was an important detail to tell.
Well,
that's kind of embarrassing.
No. Thank you for sharing that information with us. Wendell, you talked about racism and the human spirit 5 years ago, if you can remember, on Overheard with Evan Smith. And you said that people are trying to resolve something that is never going to be resolved, and that's the ugly part of human nature. Well, here we are, and we're 5 years later in the middle of not only a global pandemic, but a racial one. Do you believe that we will get to some sort of reconciliation now that it seems we have more of an attempt at understanding from people like Tyler?
Yeah, moments that we're in right now remind me of the phrase, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That I personally believe that we do evolve as a human species and get better. But I think it can be kind of tilting at windmills if we are trying to solve some aspects of the ugliness of human nature. People have to come to epiphanies on their own of understanding that holding on to some sort of ugly idea that has been cultivated and nurtured in this, the way they were socialized. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, people say, that's not in my best interest. And to understand the conversations we have to continue to have is to understand that we're trying to stop the immediacy of the damage by changing the structural, the infrastructure, this ugly infrastructure that has perpetuated it this long. If you change that, it has much more of an impact. If we say we're trying to solve racism, which is the ugly part of human nature, it's kind of, I personally believe, and that's the cynicism in me. So I preface it with that. It's trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. What we have to do is make people understand that it's in their best interest, in their own best interest, in their own humanity, that we have to change this perspective that has been given to them and understand that it's not innate, that it's something that kids pick up on immediately, really soon. People think it's innate because they learn it so fast and so soon as a little kid. I remember, I just distinctly remember when I was a little boy, don't touch my head. Mm-hmm. Never let a white man touch your head, right? Because some people don't know, maybe this is education to some of our allies out there. Mm-hmm. We all knew the joke, rub a little in head for luck. We knew that. By the way, we also know that when you say, I just met John so-and-so, we only talk through email, but I finally met him in person and he is so articulate.
Yeah.
We know that code, right?
Yeah.
Black folks and white folks know that code,
Yep.
I've been, my lawyer was sitting in the meeting and said, oh, he's black. And, and a colleague of hers, a white colleague of hers said, how do you know that? Come on. Oh, he's so articulate. Come on, that's code. That's dog whistle for everybody. All the white folks and black folks. Oh, okay. It's a brother, right? So we have to step away from that denial, and I think that what happens is it can become a distraction. I don't want to sound like the cynic, but it can become a distraction if we are trying to literally change something that we know is an ugly part of human nature. But what we can change is the evolution away from it. We may not see it completely gone in our lifetime, but we can put policy in place and change structure to make sure that laws change behavior. Leave it to us as artists to try to change the hearts and minds, right? We're going to put people in check by changing the policy and the laws first, We don't have to do, as the chief was saying, and what I recommend is we don't have to put a residence clause into our policy if we actually got rid of blight by offering police officers homes, right? You actually might get some more officers from the Lower Ninth Ward and Central City and back of town and Holly Grove, and who are living in the community, who become the living embodiment of officer friendly. The program I was so in love with as a little kid, right? Who came to school, that's officer friendly, right? And how we evolved away from that is how culturally we allowed the structures of and I'll put it out there plainly, how the police union has allowed that infectious culture to be perpetuated. I remembered the union applauding those officers, and I hate to call them officers, who killed Henry Glover, who right here on the Danziger Bridge went off, right? The union was like, no, there's no way an officer can be wrong. And then we found out the truth of what was happening. And then the union disappeared. So let's take away qualified immunity. Let's make sure that officers can't come from other departments where they have a bad record and not have that record follow them. These are things that we don't have to talk about, that we can put on the table right now. Qualified immunity, body cameras for everyone. It's helped us to get to this place of enlightenment, making sure that there's the record. Right now, if I don't pay my bills for 6 months, my credit score goes down, and you're going to hear about that forever. If you have a flood in New Orleans and you actually use your insurance to pay off and make yourself whole again, that will follow you for the rest of your life as you try to get insurance from city to city. I know this as an example. When I went to New York, they said, oh, you flooded in New Orleans in 1980. I was like, but yet a police officer can do damage in one department, leave it, get his pension, and then come to another department, and no one knows what his history is. So we have those mechanisms that we can change right now. And then we can look later and say, how can we change the human heart about racism? We'll look at that in a reflective mode after we change some of the policies that infect us today.
Well, we're putting it all on the table. Sorry, go ahead, Kenn.
I would like to come behind that. As Mr. Pierce said, being the cynic in this conversation, I do share some of the sentiment of what he says, but I find myself to be more of a cautious optimistic. And it's not because I disagree with him fundamentally, but it's because I have no choice but to feel this way. I'm going to be Black until the day I die. I have no choice about this, and I have to live in this world until the day I die. I have no choice about this unless we get a rocket to Mars. But in existing on this earth as a Black man, I'm always going to have to deal with the oppression. So the only thing I can do to help me get through my day is to have hope that tomorrow will be better. And that hope is undergirded and supported by some of the things that I see. I had a chance to go to the march for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Modesto Reyes from here in New Orleans, in the French Quarter of New Orleans. And while I was there, I saw so many white people there with signs that said Black Lives Matter. Now, we rewind about 4 years ago or so, Black Lives Matter kind of was a slur. To say it publicly met a lot of ire. A lot of people weren't comfortable saying it, and it was a lot of radical people, not radical people, but people who were strong in their beliefs and would be labeled as radical who were saying it. Now we have every company that has Black customer base saying Black Lives Matter. We have a lot of people who formerly did not appreciate what was occurring to African Americans in their community, now saying, I see it and I support you. So that gives hope. But also, I'm not blind to the situation. While changing, holding a sign up, changing your Facebook status to Black Lives Matter, or putting a Black person in your ad for a commercial may be great, or I'm sorry, painting Black Lives Matter on the street may be great. It does not fundamentally change what's happening. But the fact that we're starting this conversation, we're pointing out the issues of real systemic issues, gives me hope. And we have no choice but to move forward and do better.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation. We talked about a change, a reform in police, the police department, and also a change in the laws that we're seeing in order to make some real change in this country. Tania, I have to ask you, what sort of change do you think needs to happen? And Wendell, you can chime in on this as well. When it comes to what can happen, what do we think will happen immediately that we're seeing? Right now, we're already having this conversation about dismantling and taking down images, statues that may honor white supremacists. And I understand that that is an opportunity, of course, to create some change. But again, if it doesn't happen and legally, then really, what do we change here?
I think we need, as Wendell said, those kind of systemic changes that stick, right? That this isn't just about the rhetoric shifting overnight. And so within criminal justice, for example, the kinds of things that NOPD has done are really slogging, difficult, hard work. It's not just flipping a switch. And they've done things like create a culture of honesty. So, and that was years of firing police officers who lied, and of sending the message, if you lie, you are fired. We don't care how much we like you or how much the union sticks up for you or any of those things. It's about EPIC that Chief mentioned, where it's not just teaching you how to do the right thing, it's teaching you how to persuade your colleague to do the right thing, how to persuade your sergeant to do the right thing, how to do kind of bystander intervention. And it's remarkably effective. And it's something that really grew out of NOPD's own understanding of how change might happen. As Wendell said, it's not just about changing hearts and minds. The research on police training is that you've got to teach police. You're not going to change how they see the world in a couple of hours of training, but you can teach them how to do their job well. And so we start with that kind of fundamental reform. We have major corporations thinking about how they've been part of the problem. We have higher ed thinking about how, as much controversy there's been about affirmative action, we're realizing that there's been this whole bigger part of affirmative action that's about the kids of alumni and donors having much lower standards to get in to these elite institutions. And as the gatekeepers of opportunity, what that means about what does meritocracy actually exist in this country, of all of those fundamental shifts where you're seeing major university systems stop relying on the SAT, which is something that kids with privilege spend years and years practicing to take, and is not a very good predictor of how well you do in college, but it's a very good predictor of how much money you had for an SAT prep course, right? Yeah. So schools across the country are going test optional and test blind. And so I hope that we can push for those systemic changes that don't rely on this moment when we're all sort of quarantined and paying attention in a focused way, which I really worry might pass.
I'm sorry, Wendell, you have something to say?
I wanted to reference Chief Ferguson. I met him as an officer. I met him as the epitome and the reflection of why most in my study as an actor, I'm not a police officer, but I played one on TV, that sort of thing. In my study of the officers and the policies, I've met so many officers who became a policeman because the crime they saw did not reflect their community. That the 1% that were making it so hard for others in the community that disproportionately affected Black communities did not reflect the Miss Anns and Mr. Joes who got up every day and went to jobs as the working poor and the underserved communities to build better lives. And they became police officers to help in that process. That was the sort of police officer that Chief Ferguson was and the sort of chief that he is. I wish we could hear those voices more in the discussion. We see it every day when it comes to the discussion of the do's and the don'ts in policing. I think it will help when we realize that a part of the job will be to break that code of silence, that sort of fraternal idea that, you do not, rat somebody out. A bad cop is a bad cop, and they shouldn't even allow themselves to call themselves a cop. This is a bad person who's gotten in. We should see that as infectious. I'll never forget watching, he's an infamous police officer, or was, in Katrina, who had abandoned his post and had the audacity to go on television in the Baton Rouge market where I had run from the storm, breaking on his commanders and indicting the New Orleans Police Department as he had abandoned his post and breached his oath to his job. But he had the audacity to feel that he could do that because of the culture that allows bad police to come in and be protected by those qualified immunities, police unions that have a negotiating tactic to hold that like a Damocles sword over any sort of ideas of ramification, reform. And to root that out is something that the chief is doing. And what I also accept is the fact that the mass resignations I accept. The people that say, hey man, you are now tying my hands and therefore I'm gonna leave the police department. And all of these reforms are the worst thing that could happen for real police. They're actually letting you know that they were a part of the problem, and let them go. Because we will be able to find someone to fill their shoes. I personally believe that once we tie community policing back to our homes that we need to be rebuilding here in New Orleans, we also need to, I agree with the chief when saying defund was the wrong word, the wrong message. It's kind of like in the 60s when they said burn, baby, burn. What they meant was we want to destroy, this prison industrial complex and these injustices that are infrastructure, but we don't want to burn down our community, right? But burn, baby, burn became the call, just like defund the police. I actually believe in funding the police more. You know how? Why do we have these this is real New Orleans. I'm gonna get in trouble for this. Why do we have these quasi-private public initiatives getting more money than the government itself? We have an economic development office. Why do we give money to the Business Alliance? Why does the zoo get more than the police and the firemen in our millage? It makes no sense. Why are we carving off of our city treasury to give to these quasi-government organizations outside of it? I was on the board of one. I'm really gonna get in trouble for this. Idea Village. We didn't need any of the New Orleans Treasury to bring business in, to bring innovation and technology in, to nurture that. We had support from around the country. We had American Enterprise and Uber and all of these people. So why are we getting a part of that treasury? That money could go to resources in underserved communities. And I say to this day, there are people in City Hall who have never spent any time in the Lower Ninth Ward, have never gone to Daniel Street in Central City and had a hot sausage sandwich from the corner stove, who don't know the communities that they're actually leading. And that's where I say, if we really want to look in the mirror to thine own self be true, that's how we fund the police and stop the redirection of funds away from communities that need the help into these quasi sort of old school New Orleans public-private groups.
Well, I can tell you, our Facebook is lighting up with comments, Wendell. Lighting up with comments right now. Thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. I want to give you all an opportunity to kind of give any closing thoughts. Chief Ferguson, I would love for you to give closing thoughts. We can begin with you.
Yes. First, again, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for being a part of this panel, everyone for allowing me to be a part of this panel with you all. This is just the beginning. These conversations, I already reached out to my public information to reach out to you for some information, because I want to continue some of the conversations that we are having right now. It is my job, our duty, to make sure we have the policies and procedures in place as we talk about policies and procedures across the country with regards to making things right. I have to make sure that this department have the policies and procedures that we build upon to make sure that we're bias-free policing, making sure we're treating people and serving people not because of their race, creed, or color, but because of the needs that they may have because when they call us. So we are here, we are an ally, and there's much more work to be done. This is just the beginning for us, and we understand there's much more work that is needed to be done, and we'll be a part of that solution rather than the problem.
All right, Tyler?
Yeah, Charisse, thank you so much for having me. I guess my closing thoughts, I want to commend Chief Ferguson for being so forward and open to these discussions and the strides, leaps and bounds that he and his department are making and will continue to make. So I want to thank him on that. I want to comment on Wendell attacking at the systemic level. There are so many issues, and repairing the community to police relationship, and then disrupting the school to prison pipeline, maybe doing more cadetships and mentorships, mandatory for all officers, to not only help integrate into the community, but help with mental stress levels. Take a day off, have a ride along, have a social worker there, help mend these relationships at the grassroots. And then with cadetships, summer programs with fast track to getting into the academy. So you have kids in the community who are proud to be participants and start disrupting some of that, silent lip, no ratting stuff, get them involved. So I know that's kind of a long-winded closing, but again, thank you. Happy to continue, happy to be invited. We're doing a lot of work in St. Tammany Parish. In my hometown, a conversation about race. So please look us up. We got a lot of educational tools that we'd be happy to share with everybody. So thank you again, Charisse.
All right, Mr. Barnes.
Charisse, thank you for having me tonight. I want to thank everyone on the panel for having me as well. And most importantly, what I like to do is thank the people who have been on the front line, leading these discussions for so long. These discussions that have not gotten the type of attention that they should have, but are now getting the attention. I want to thank them for that. I want to thank the allies who are working their ways through figuring out how to be an ally and learn about the situation at the same time. I want to thank them for recognizing what has been happening. Most importantly, I would like to thank our police. I'd like to thank our judges. I would like to thank everyone involved. But most importantly, what I would like to say is that while we may think about our police, our judges, our attorneys as members or individuals dealing with the criminal justice system, also remember that the people who are going through the criminal justice system are just as much as involved. And once they've served their debt to society, we need to make sure that we're pulling them into conversations like this to make sure that we are being the most effective and we're not acting in a way that's disparate based on race, gender, or any other type of fact of that sort.
All right, thanks so much, Ken. Wendell?
I'd just like to say what I say to my community all the time: exercise your right of self-determination. We get to decide what our values are and how we're going to act on them in our community. And we should understand that a rising tide floats all boats. If you get a chance, everyone, reach out to someone you don't know, someone you didn't expect to know, someone whose life you know nothing about. Go to a community within our own city. We're only 15 minutes away from each other. I live in Gentilly. Try to have dinner uptown. Folks uptown, come to the lower 9th Ward and shop at Burrell's. If you live on the West Bank, come to the East Bank, and vice versa. reach out to each other, because our community, we are too small of a community not to understand that we're in this together, and understand the blueprint has been given to us. There was a Moses generation that has been fighting since the inception of this city to make sure that all people have access to something that is just and right and fair. And look to those, the deacons of defense, the civil rights movement, the Christian and Jewish community. I forget the name of the organization. We're here for each other.
Great, thank you. Ms. Tetlow.
I talk to a lot of young people feeling pretty powerless right now, and they want to matter, and they're not sure how. And I think this panel's just been an extraordinary example of the ways that you can matter, that you pick a lane and you run hard. So you can be an activist like Tyler, turning the heat up and starting brave conversations in a community that won't always want to hear it. You can be the person who works from within the system like Chief, and who makes a difference from within and changes a culture and deals with the complexity of how to make it actually right. You can be a lawyer pushing on that system like Kenn. You can be a truth teller like Charisse and tell those narratives and do the kind of compelling story that we just heard in the talk that makes people understand. And you can be an artist like Wendell Pierce, who's one of my very favorite in the whole world, who makes people feel and understand the humanity of folks that they never used to really see. And to do this work in whatever form or fashion you do it is the ultimate expression of patriotism, that you love this country enough to want it to live up to its ideals. It's the ultimate expression of faith, that you believe in your religious necessity that we treat each other as brothers and sisters, because that's what God commands of us. It is who we want to be. And this is a moment when our lives have been entirely disruptive, when the world has shifted under us in every possible way, when we're all asking these fundamental questions of ourselves. And as we learned in Katrina, we're learning again now, this is a moment where we can grow and be different and be better. And so I'm so proud of all the people being a big part of that. And I'm so humbled to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. I think that all of us are doing everything on our different fronts in order to confront what is happening in this country right now. And of course, this conversation, it will continue, and which is why we will continue to talk more, not just about the talk, but many of the topics that we brought up in this conversation, including redlining, including microaggressions, including some of the things that we have seen dismantling a system again that is built upon systemic racism. Thank you all so much for joining us. And of course, for our Facebook viewers, we have several of them leaving comments and for joining us as well. All right. And also, if you want to continue to watch the talk is online as well on our WWL-TV.com page, as well as YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. You can find it everywhere. We want everyone's eyes on it, because this conversation, it does need to continue. And I'm sure I'll be bugging all of you again very soon. Thank you all so much.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.